Hello everyone and welcome to Testing Talks Online. We have a very exciting panel discussion for you today called Automation Best Practices, Setting Your Team Up for Success. This panel topic was inspired by feedback following our last Testing Talks Online, where some of our attendees submitted some great questions around choosing the best automation framework and different approaches to embedding said automation framework within the team. We are super lucky today to be joined by 5 industry experts. Jonathan Lips from Headspin, who is joining us from Canada and is the project and architectural lead for Appium. Manoj Kumar from ThoughtWorks, who is joining us from India. Manoj is a key contributor to Selenium and a member of the Selenium Leadership Committee. Kelly Wasson from Transpire, who is joining us from Australia and is Principal QA and a popular speaker on all things API testing. Thomason Thiel from Tricentis, joining us from France, known to many as a leading performance specialist in the industry. And finally, Bazarat Ali Syed from Canva, who is joining us from Australia and is a front-end developer and Cypress.io ambassador. I want to extend a massive thank you to our partners, our 2 platinum partners, Tricentis and Headspin, and our silver partner, Vornex. Our partners make this event possible by funding our webinar platform and prizes. So I encourage all our attendees to check out their websites and respective offerings. I also want to thank my fellow organisers at Testing Talks, Aswin Gola and Leon Vessel, who are amazing fellow organisers. They help me so much behind the scenes, are incredible friends and fellow testers in the industry. The reason we created Testing Talks was to create a fun and amazing events with our awesome testing community. Industry-leading testers as speakers, incredible prizes, delicious catering, fun and games. With the current pandemic, this has made running such events tough. But we hope Testing Talks Online has filled the gap and provided some added joy for our community until we can come back together in the future, bigger and better than ever before. Speaking of which, we are proud to announce that we officially kicked off organisation for Testing Talks Conference 2021. Obviously with the COVID pandemic, especially for the ones in Melbourne, we're playing this by year. But needless to say, we will have a reunion. I know most testers I speak to really want that. They want a day in the calendar to look forward to come together as a community. So whether it happens on our date in October, God willing, hopefully we can, and we're at the right position to be safe in doing so. But you know what, if we can't, we'll do it in 2022. So there'll be a reunion no matter what. And I honestly believe that our community needs it more than ever. Just on Testing Talks Conference 2021, our goal is to make it a fun event for all, to share, learn, and reconnect in person. We're going to have amazing speakers, interactive sessions paired with delicious catering and an open bar. There'll be tons of swag, super fun games, and lots of awesome prizes up for grabs all day long for our attendees. We'll be working with health experts and the Melbourne Convention Exhibition Centre to ensure Testing Talks Conference 2021 is COVID safe. We plan to send out an email personally to each member of the Testing Talks community containing a letter to help convince your boss to let you and the team attend Testing Talks Conference 2021. Due to the pandemic, we will naturally offer a refund or rollover option to Testing Talks 2022 if COVID was to cause us to cancel this year's conference. Thanks to our incredible partners today, we have 7 awesome prizes up for grabs for our attendees, including a $100 Amazon gift card, a drone, a $100 JB Hi-Fi gift card, a $100 Woolworths gift card, $100 Coles gift card, a JBL Bluetooth speaker, and an Amazon Alexa. 6 of our amazing prizes can be won by getting in the top 6 scores on our Testing Talks Online game, which can be found on the Testing Talks Online website. I will link the Testing Talks Online website now. Within that website, you basically just want to, on the homepage, click the Play Game button. It's a big purple button on the top of the sort of homepage. Finally, we are giving away 1 extra prize to an attendee selected at random who asks a great question throughout the panel discussion using the Q&A feature found in Zoom. We encourage all our attendees to use the chat feature in Zoom to leave us any questions you would like our panel to address. Our panelists will respond to any questions via Zoom chat. We'll also endeavour to ask some questions live during the panel discussion. Once again, thanks for joining us today. Let's kick off our panel discussion on automation best practices, setting your team up for success. One of the most common questions I get from my fellow testers in the industry is around automation framework planning, particularly questions around the best automation to use for a specific project or tech stack. and more importantly, how to get the wider team, developers, BAs, fellow testers, on board with the new automation framework. I want to kick off this panel discussion by going to Bazarat Ali Siad. Let's imagine you're a developer on a new or established project. What is your approach to determining the automation framework that would be the best practice moving forward?
So it really depends upon the team. The first thing that I would do is understand where the team is at right now in terms of their testing and in terms of their development, understand more about their technology stack. And then there is definitely a happy state that I like to have things in, and we will go through that later on in this conference as well. Uh, but I'll take that happy state and the technology choices they've already made and the kind of product that they're trying to deliver, and then find a happy medium where I can carry the developers from their technology stack and the technology choices to something that is up to date, and then really stop where either the budget runs out or the amount of effort that the developers and the QAs can put in their migration that runs out. So my happy state, their happy state, find a happy medium, and stop when everyone's happy.
That sounds good. I guess, Manoj, on a similar token, what is your happy state for an automation testing on a project, and how does it look?
Good question. I think I'll be really happy if I see 100% green build. I mean, I was just joking. So happy state really means, I think as long as it works for you and the team, and is providing value based on what's, at which stage in your pipeline that your test is validating your build. I think it should be everyone's responsibility to take quality as their, everyday today's work. And I think testing really has been moving. If you see the paradigm, I think the anti pattern that we have seen, the inverted test pyramid to test pyramid, and now we have Kent's champion trophy way of doing things. I think no matter whatever paradigm you use, design patterns and stuff like that, using whatever tools you may use, I think it really depends on, you don't always find shortcuts like using retries and stuff like that. And if it's something goes wrong, just try deep dive, find it what's going wrong, and make sure it could be a functionality miss or anything, a performance hit for your applications. So just look forward on that angle, not with the state that if I see green, only then I'm happy with my automation. So I think that mindset has to become with an entire team rather than just seeing a green build, but seeing what value does your automation suite brings to you and your team.
Thanks, Manoj. We've had a great question already from the audience. Thanks to Akan. I'm gonna throw this over to Jonathan Lips. How does a remote first approach affect your choices when setting up a team?
It's a good question. I don't know that it would affect my choices too much, I guess. It does mean that you're going to have to think a lot more about how the team is organized and structured. I like to think that if you have a healthy, functional team which can cooperate on a variety of levels, then kind of whether you're remote or not doesn't really matter. The kinds of choices that you're making when setting up a team, I mean, we often go first of all to technical choices, like what sort of automation framework do we want to use, things like that. I guess I would almost want to ask Hakan, like, what sort of choices do you have in mind, right? Are we talking about, again, like which automation framework to use, how to structure the way that the team operates with other teams in the organization? Because there are sort of ideals for all of these different scenarios. And I wouldn't say that the remote versus non-remote question is really the most important one. You're going to have to decide which technologies to use. You're going to have to decide how to structure your team. You're going to have to decide how quality factors in to your overall product building approach and things like that. And so the remote versus non-remote question becomes just a very kind of minor practical thing compared to some of those other questions, in my opinion.
Thanks, Jonathan. And touching on the team aspect of that, Kelly, how do you better understand the skill levels and automation expertise among the team?
Yeah, I think it's probably, common knowledge that all teams are different, and you're not going to have that one size fits all solution. It's very evident. Every team's different. Every team has a different makeup depending on client expectations or availability at the time for your company. But every company, so every team member has a different level of coding skill ability. They have different levels of confidence, a common understanding of the tools that are available, but also the maturity of the product that you're testing. So there's a lot of different factors that affect a team. But I think a good way to almost like start off the process is just having some of those initial workshops or just sessions where you do have that common understanding around the existing skills, for example, and potentially the tools and experience your team already has. And then that opportunity to identify gaps, right? So we know that from day one, there's going to be some opportunities to investigate what we can kind of do as a team to be able to fulfill your test strategy. But I think also it's a good way of understanding the comfort levels of your team, because test automation is pretty confronting and overwhelming, and many people don't know where to start. And so I think if you set up a forum where you can be honest and you can be upfront and you can have almost a safe place to be able to chat to your team members, and essentially that's kind of what you want to get out of this opportunity, is just to be able to find those ways to set those common goals, and have almost an opportunity for the peers in the team to get almost some common understanding of the challenges. I feel like there's, especially, you do have your developer and your tester kind of approaches, and it's a nice way to bring them together, because having these kind of platforms allows the team to identify, opportunities to be able to pair program, for example. So if a tester highlights the fact that they're really keen to get on board and want to contribute, that particular platform would allow developers to almost encourage it and support those initiatives. So I think building platforms or environments where you can kind of have that open communication just kind of gives your team its opportunity to just really put out on the table, and take into account, tech stack and product roadmaps, absolutely. So you choose the right frameworks for your team, but also take into account the people aspect, because the success of this is only going to really, occur if everybody is on board and has the confidence in it. So.
Thanks, Kelly. We've had another great question from the audience. Keep them coming, guys. There's a $100 Amazon gift card as well for a lucky Q&A at random. Nitesh, a separate automation team is better, or automation should be done by the same members who are involved in sprint functional test work? Okay, this is a great question around sort of, should we have a segregated automation team, or should it be done by the testers in the project? I'm going to cross to Manoj on this one. Manoj, what's your take?
Good question again. I think it depends on what sort of style that your project is based on, particularly with respect to test automation. If you're following pure agile with BDD, automation test suite, I guess you already know the answer. Without a collaborative effort, it wouldn't be called a complete sort of delivery work, like as long as automation is part of your definition of done. But if it's in agile and if it is in BDD, then I wouldn't still say a separate automation team is always better. It should always, quality is everyone's responsibility, in my opinion. So it should come as part of your team. And I would say, don't consider it as an automation team, but consider yourself as a quality analyst or a quality evangelist for your team and for your product, that you bring in all the nuances of testing and have that going, boost your team. Sometimes, devs get tired in writing so much piece of code and sometimes forget the testing side of things. So that's when, we as QAs step up the game and bring that quality momentum to the team and get that going. So I would say, quality is everyone's responsibility. So try and work collaboratively there.
Thanks, Manoj. We do have along Thomas Steele today as well. We love having performance engineers at our sessions. In a perfect world, you have great performance and automation in a project in a perfect world. I want to bring in Thomas as well and ask, what performance testing tools are on your radar? And have you been on any really cool projects recently? You could use an example.
Yeah, so basically, I'd say, like the landscape of load testing tools doesn't evolve that much. We can see some things that arrive, but it's not really groundbreaking. So there's nothing really new. What I would say is, when you look at performance testing tools, just go to your needs, meaning either you go shift left and go with things that can do as code and where developers can do tests, and testers and developers can work together, or you can go on the end-to-end base and go there. Talking about recent projects, I've had a project, I can't really say the name of the TV show, but like I've had a project on the TV show for like the launch of a famous one involving dragons. So I won't I won't say the name, but basically the big challenge we had there was we had to, in a week, do the load test just to test the launch, and for hundreds of thousands of users, and we had to provision all those machines. And like the big challenge we had was, we had to do that in a week, so we had to use cloud basically because of the huge load. So yeah, that was really an interesting project, because even with all the cloud providers that we've tried, we basically had to use all the Australian load generators with those cloud providers, try to see how that worked. We completely we've bottlenecked the network of those providers in Australia. So then we had to involve more of APAC, of Asia Pacific load generators, and use them in Hong Kong and everything. And yeah, we managed to do that thanks to our cloud platform in minutes. Well, I'd say more, lots of minutes, but yeah, we managed to do that and do those tests. But it was really interesting to look at those challenges, to see, because in a sense, load generation, we have scripts, and it's automation at heart, because we need to automate lots of users, and all the challenges of optimizing those scripts to be able to run hundred thousands of load generators there. So it was really interesting to see and to do.
Awesome. We've had so many great questions coming in. This one's for everyone, but I'm gonna direct it at one of our panelists. It's, over the many years of all your QA experience, what is one of the most important learnings you have taken away so far that you would like to share? And I'm gonna hit Jonathan Lips with that.
Wow, I don't get time to like go through my mental inventory of things that I've learned. So it'll be more like probably a random good thing I've learned than maybe the most important thing. Yeah, I mean, this also maybe touches a question that I saw somebody was asking as well, which is, how do you know what to test? And this is, I think, a really important thing, especially when you're starting new projects, because you want your test effort to be successful. You don't want it to fail, because that will impact the quality of your application, and also impact people's view of the importance of quality in your organization. So, I mean, the model that I have, which I'm sure is not unique, is you kind of have your two dimensions. One dimension would be like the frequency of user experience, right? So if you have part of your application that every user touches every day, that would be very high up, let's say, in this dimension. If you think about another dimension being how critical is a particular feature to your company making money, that would be, for example, like the checkout flow. Maybe you have maybe you're selling cars, so people don't check out very frequently. It's kind of a rare thing when they do, but you certainly want that part to work. Otherwise, you're missing out on tens of thousands of dollars or whatever it is. So that would be very far on this other dimension. So my suggestion is always start off with the things that are kind of as high as possible in both dimensions, and then work backwards from there, because then you're automating essentially the things that have the greatest impact on both user experience and your company's bottom line. And then you can kind of fan out from there. And by that time, you sort of know how much investment you're putting in to each particular test case. And you know that as you're going down, you're getting sort of decreasing return on that investment because you're automating less and less important things. So at some point, you kind of have a feel for, oh, well, it takes me this long to write this test, and it costs us this many resources to run it and to keep it maintained. And this feature that we're now automating, or this edge case or whatever, is pretty low on this chart, on this graph. So maybe we should stop here. So that's kind of, I guess I would summarize this learning as kind of having a framework for starting off your automation and knowing kind of when to stop or when to begin to focus on other areas that are going to provide you more value than just tackling more and more edge cases and making your build longer and longer and more prone to failure.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. Great perspective. This next one's a little bit controversial sometimes. Should testers be the ones doing the automation testing, or should it be a team effort? I'm going to cross to Manoj for that.
I guess we slightly answered that before. I think there was a question on that, where I said I think quality is everyone's responsibility, and depends on what sort of style does your project use. I mean, if it's agile BDD, then yeah, I think collaborative effort just really means. I think I also see other question on, is BDD really? I think this question is gone. I think probably it's an answer already, but I think yeah, I think I would say, put yourself as a quality analyst hat and can be a quality evangelist in your team, and bringing quality products to your company. I think that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Manoj. I want to cross back to Kelly. What are some of the issues you have faced in trying to embed automation testing into some of your previous API projects?
Yeah, no, I think the biggest one would be buy-in, which tends to be a pretty standard response when it comes down to test automation, and everybody having a common understanding of what exactly it is and what does it mean for your team, your business, your product. But in terms of API on its own, I think that alone has that extra bit of challenge. I feel that when you use the word test automation, a lot of stakeholders or team members can sometimes just assume that it's limited to just unit testing or UI testing. The bit in the middle is probably one of the most important parts, and I don't think there's a common understanding that there is actually a layer there that we can test, and there's a lot of value in checking that. And so I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is around just kind of identifying that there's a quick win here, and we can actually get the team integrating or applying some of those integration tests. So that's definitely one. One of the other ones would be around availability of API specifications or contracts. And the reason for that is because I think from the common understanding of a contract is everybody in the team knows what the API is going to do. So front-end developers know what they're going to get, back-end developers know what they're going to build, and the QA team can prepare. And so we can create API tests as a matter of proactively to be able to set those up and have them ready to go as soon as the API is ready. But what tends to happen is these API specs don't always necessarily exist, or they're out of date or not maintained, or they can be generated but in a reverse engineered way. So the API already exists and then specs are generated from it. And so it does kind of have an impact. So, if we were to kind of write these API tests in maybe a proactive way without any specification, it means that we're kind of doing it as a trial and error. So we're making a bucket load of assumptions, which means the test may not be as reliable. We also are waiting until we kind of have more stable APIs, so we can't really be proactive and try to kind of think about those edge cases. So I think, again, having documentation in place when it comes to API testing is important. And so I think that's definitely been one of the challenges, is the value in what a spec can actually provide the QA team. And lastly, like everything else, the skills involved to be able to find the right team members to contribute to API tests. I think as much as it's straightforward and they are easy to build out and maintain, trying to find some of those core team members to help contribute is a challenge sometimes.
Thanks, Kelly. This is a really interesting question. A lot of our panelists are trying to answer the questions individually as well, but I really want to hear Bazarat talk to this to the rest of the attendees. So I guess, how much should one concern themselves with the quality of the automation code itself? And it's a really interesting question, something a lot of engineers are particularly passionate about. Like, okay, it's one thing to have an automation framework and have your automation test, but how do you actually ensure the underlying code of the automation test is good quality code? Bazarat.
So it depends upon a number of factors. One of them is, are the tests actually embedded with the rest of the source code? So at the companies where I work and the teams that I work, I definitely have the testers embedded within the developer workflow, and the developers writing most of the tests. So they follow the same level of quality for their tests as they follow for the rest of the application code, and it's being checked and linted by the same tools. And in that case, definitely you want the quality to be the same. An additional factor is how attached you are to the test through the lifetime of the application. So if tests are something that are designed to bootstrap your application for the initial launch, then you might sacrifice some of the quality. But what that means is that as you evolve your application, you'll definitely start either disabling them or deleting these tests. And you have to be mindful of this fact. Like if that was your intention, then it is fine to do that. But if you want your test to ensure continuous quality, which is something that you should definitely strive for, then you want them to be of good quality for longer maintainability.
Thanks, Bazarat. We've got a great question from Jaslom with regards to performance engineering. Hey, Thomas, what's your take on performance testing mobile applications? What are the key things you look out for with native mobile apps? Thomas?
So it's talking about native mobile apps, but yeah, basically for mobile apps, there are, well, you guys know there are three kinds, like native, hybrid, or browser-based, basically. For native, I'd say the best approach would be, so on the performance testing side, it's basically API testing, because in the end, your native app is just calling APIs on your servers. So the idea is to record that traffic, to do load testing. It's actually quite simple to do. It's like any browser application, but even simpler because it's APIs. So I'd say the bottlenecks are basically the same at any web app, because in the end you still have that tiered architecture. So you'd look for the same things like memory leaks and memory failures on the application servers. You'd look at for databases, at indexes and disk usage and everything. So it would basically be the same thing. But what I would do on native apps is I would actually combine load testing with functional testing and automation, because the idea is when you do just performance testing on the protocol level, you just have the protocol timings, meaning you'll have the request times, and you don't have the real user experience. So the idea is usually you want to integrate that with things like Appium, for instance, things like, well, basically anything that will drive your UI to be able to have the impact of your protocol-based timings on your client timings. So you want to have both visions to see what impacts what, and to have both worlds basically in your load testing.
Thanks, Thomas. I want to cross to an interesting question that's been asked by Lee Hawkins. I see great value in sensibly chosen automation checks. In these times of CI/CD pipelines for everything, when do you think it still makes sense to take a pause somewhere along the pipeline for some human exploratory testing? I'm going to cross that one over to Kelly.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. I think at the end of the day, this movement into test automation is very apparent. And I think the people aspect is still very important. I think at the end of the day, we're still trying to provide a product for the end user. And the end user tends to be human majority of the time. So I completely agree. I think using that feature-based checking approach, I would like to attribute our CI pipelines to do the first level of checking. We're making sure that we're not introducing any of those regression issues. We're just making sure we're just putting those checks in. We're going to make sure that nothing broke as a part of building this next feature. But as soon as that first run goes through our pipelines and our first level of automated checks, the next level is the people check. And so the way that we work is we tend to, we will build our features and they will go through those pipelines, but we will then have our manual test team or our test analysts kind of go through and validate those requirements and make sure that we do have that opportunity to do that exploratory testing, and our acceptance criteria is in line with what the end user is intending to expect.
Thanks, Kelly. Something that also ties in really well to that question is a question from Santosh Mohan. Any best practices on reporting automation failures? I'm going to go to Manoj for this. I'm really curious for your perspective.
Cool. I guess reporting is one of the important features in your automation framework. I think this is something that it should be shouldn't be an afterthought process. I've seen a lot of people do that, thinking, I'll get my page object pattern done. I'll get my tests running going. I think people spending a lot of time in getting the page objects done, but then not spending real time in writing the test. What I mean by that is, I think the Indian automation framework, I think abstraction, I think don't repeat yourself is good, but to a certain extent, but not to the deepest level of its thing. I think Ken called it as an aha moment. I think some level of duplication is good enough. So I think when you think through that during the initial stages of your automation creation, framework creation, I believe reporting is one of the important stuff. How would you report that? I think a number of teams use what's best for them. I've seen teams using, as simple as Slack pings to do that. Sometimes it gets slipped away because we sometimes snooze the notifications. And sometimes people do emails. And sometimes I've seen people having sort of, a light on top of the team monitor so that, build goes red. I think the light pops up in red and the build is green. We can see the green light. So I think it totally depends, it shouldn't be an afterthought is my point here, and carefully choose what sort of medium that reporting is to be, and it's very, very important, because that sort of shows you what sort of efforts that you're putting in terms of automation, and if you're not showing that effectively, then it sort of questions what sort of effort that you're putting in. So make sure you do that pretty right at the very beginning.
Thanks, Manoj. So I guess up to this point in the panel discussion, we've talked a little bit about choosing the right automation framework, and we've sort of touched on embedding the team on that journey, both from an automation and performance perspective. But I thought what we could do to shake it up a little bit and get our panelists really thinking is actually putting them into a scenario. So we're going to start with Jonathan Lips. You have came in as a tester on an established banking iOS application developed in Swift. In your experience, what automation framework or tool would you be looking to explore with the team?
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario. So if we assume that I'm, have a background of an automated tester, an automation tester who writes automation code, I'm guessing that I'm probably not an iOS developer, that I may not know Swift myself. So we can go different directions based on the assumptions we make in the story. So if I come in and I do know those things, I have a background as an iOS developer and I know Swift, and the rest of the team is only in charge of the iOS app. Like we're not, like the company doesn't have an Android app, let's say. It would be pretty tempting to go with using Xcode and XUI test directly, because we would get the advantage of, being able to kind of run our tests in the context of our IDE where we're writing the code. We have kind of a common language between the testers and the developers. In that scenario, you'd almost want to have just the developers write the test themselves. So if I know iOS development, you'd prefer a situation where you're just taking development tasks and then taking responsibility for testing them. That's not really the most common scenario, though. I mean, we're probably talking, I have a background as, let's say, a Selenium test author, and I'm told, okay, now I have to support this iOS app that the developers are writing in Swift and I don't know Swift. In this type of situation, if I'm going to be the one who's responsible for writing the tests, it probably makes more sense to go with something like Appian. I can leverage, my knowledge about some other programming language if I'm not familiar with Swift. I have a very kind of natural way of expressing automation capabilities, like what I'm familiar with from Selenium. And it's the kind of thing where if the developers wanted to get involved, they would find that pretty easy to do as well. But as you can see, like we can tweak the assumptions of this scenario in a few different directions, and depending on that, we might have a different outcome.
Thanks, Jonathan. All right, I'm going to test out Bazarat, a different scenario. You're a developer at a new startup that plans to scale fast and develop in React. In your experience, what automation framework or tool would you be looking to explore with the team?
So I'm definitely biased here. I am a Cypress ambassador, as you might know. And so I can't be 100% completely unbiased, but I also love, as an example, TypeScript, but it is another thing that's extremely popular. So I think the community generally agrees with me in these opinions. And in terms of Cypress, like even if you're choosing some other framework like Angular has deprecated Protractor in favor of Cypress. If you are using Vue, then Vue CLI actually gives you the option to add Cypress as your E2E framework. And then in terms of React and Cypress integration, Cypress is actually built with React. So you really get the best of class support in terms of React development. And the Cypress team actually has this package called under the Cypress organization, so add Cypress/React. And what this package allows you to do is you can test React components in isolation without having to run a full end-to-end application. So you can, for example, take screenshots of your components in isolation, write other integration tests with just the components. Don't have to set up a page route or a lot of the other complicated things that you might need to do. So yeah, Cypress all the way.
Thanks, Bazarat. I'm just going to continue on with you for a moment, though, because we've got a great question from Bell Prick. I'm not sure if you've done this type of automation, but are visual tests better than functional UI tests? And I guess the argument is around, Cypress or doing your own open source solution to assert on the actual UI itself or components of the UI versus a tool like Applitools, for example.
Yeah, so in terms of front-end development, visual tests help a lot. An example of that is something like React Testing Library when like it's improved now. So they do have tools that publish images of your components as well. But the previous experience was that you would just get the DOM and then you have to scan through HTML to see if that HTML matches what you expected it to render. Whereas with something like Cypress, where you are visually testing your applications, it's much easier to see, okay, so I expected this button to be present, but it's not present. And another example is when you're creating style guides, HTML really, or like the combination of HTML and CSS doesn't really tell you what it looks like to the user. So you definitely want to take screenshots there and compare the screenshots. So I'm a big fan of visual testing for end-to-end applications.
Thanks, Bazarat. All right, Callie, you are a tester on a new API enterprise piece of work developed in Node. In your experience, what automation framework or tool would you be looking to explore with the team?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question for the fact that there are an immense number of ways to be able to check APIs, right? And I think at the end of the day, what you want to try to do is try to find frameworks or testing tools that complements the team and their skill set. And because we are talking Node, the most obvious kind of solution would be JavaScript-based testing frameworks for the sake of it allowing the dev and tester collaboration. So as I mentioned earlier, if you can start day one where you're able to have the team members collaborate together, I think that you're not only getting the I guess almost buy-in because you're on the same page, but also it allows the dev and tester to be able to help each other. So testers new to this space can get the support from the devs because you're talking literally the same language. You can have the devs also help pitch in. You can embed some of those shared resources, but also devs can run things locally too. So as they're developing, rather than pushing straight up to your CI, for example, they can run all your tests locally. So there are benefits in using frameworks that are embedded into the same code base. I was just going to also add actually though, but it's also worthwhile to kind of throw in there some, you want to make sure that you can actually test end-to-end workflows. I think it's very easy to fall into the opportunity of just testing a single endpoint at one time. Ideally looking for a tool that allows you to kind of work through all those end-to-end scenarios, which I think will be super helpful.
Awesome. I'm going to cut from our scenarios just for a moment because I think this is a question a lot of our attendees are passionate about and want to probably hear the answer to. Manoj, what is the future for manual testers? I personally believe they will always have a role, but I'm interested in the opinions of the panel. That's a great question by David Brooks. Manoj?
Yeah, I just answered that over the chat, but I think it's worth mentioning again here. I believe the QA's role will exist. I think it's never gonna, go extinct. But I think I believe only the horizons of what the QA does in the team will just evolve with the period of time. Not just sticking to it. I believe the QA's sole responsibility is to ensure the quality of the product is maintained. But with the trend that I see going on with various clients that I see in ThoughtWorks as well as with my previous experience, being with companies like Apple Tools and IAG in Australia and different companies, I think the team expects a little more in terms of responsibility. I know it's debatable, but it just boils down to your personal aspirations as well. For me, I've become a React dev in my team. When I was doing automation, because it's end of the day you fiddle with HTML by inspecting element and all that, right? And similarly, I've done the same sort of stuff in being an ops person as well. I've become a release manager myself over the period of 2 years after being a QA in the same team in IAG by managing different environments. That sort of balance is what you need to do. I see. I think in short, just to focus on the question. While I give these scenarios as an example, I think yes, the QA's role will exist. It will never go away. But it's just that what level of flexibility you have in terms of you learning a new stuff in contributing to the team. In terms of either if you're good at coding and doing only automation, then look at other things like contributing to some of the integration tests in up in the pyramid. And if you're someone who wants to do the ops sort of thing, you can manage your own environments. Don't depend upon your ops person to spin up your own QA environment. You start from there and you go beyond that, right? I think that's where I think the trend is going forward.
Thank you, Manoj. Thomas, let's imagine we have a large-scale API piece of work and the team have now selected a great solution for automation testing. How would you, as a performance engineer, approach choosing the best performance testing tool to complement the existing build pipeline?
So basically, I'd have a look at. So if we talk about continuous testing and pipelines, basically I look for a tool that I can use where I can basically code my test without needing a UI, like a tool where the developers can do the test themselves. And the performance tester can help the developer define the load scenarios, like which loads to do. So yeah, I basically use a tool where I can use either YAML files to define my load and things like this to make it simple, to make it easy to maintain. That's approachable by developers, because usually developers, they don't really like to do performance testing. So something they can really work with. So yeah, I just use a tool where like I said, very simple to use, very simple to where I can define API testing and REST calls and everything in that YAML file, and something that can work both with developers, testers, and where I can get dashboards very easily. Yeah.
Thank you, Thomas. Manoj, as an open source contributor, with the way JavaScript is evolving, how would you select the go-to automation framework?
Right, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Well, I think it depends. I think I would start with that. Being putting my consultant hat, I think I get this question every time I walk into different customers across ThoughtWorks. What tools that I do? I think we have seen JavaScript just evolves like any other language, I remember writing the pyramid of doom way of writing tests to now writing async await sort of tests. I think the test frameworks also has evolved over the period of time. I would say choose the tools that are, best work for you and your team based on what's level of testing that you would want to do. I've used Selenium for about 10 years or more than that now, since the initial RC days, and I've used Appium. I've become a committer for both due to my continuous exposure to these tools. But that said, I've used Cypress as well, and I've used Puppeteer as well, and we have used Tycho as well, which is another tool from ThoughtWorks. But all of these tools exist for one or other reasons. Just see what works for you in teams in sort of scenarios. So if the main end goal is to do end-to-end automation, sort of mimicking a user experience, just what you see in the top of test pyramid, use the tools that would exactly do that. I think in that way, what we have as part of a W3C WebDriver protocol just exactly does that, where it mimics the user actions out of the browser context. But whereas if you're writing some quick automated tests to do some quick debugging for your developers or within your team, and you're not worried about the chatty protocol that it has, or you're not worried about running in different browsers to test your end experience, I think tools like Tycho or Cypress or Puppeteer, I think these tools would pretty much work for you. So I mean, the answer is, again, choose what's best for you. I think there are a number of tools that will still keep on evolving. I know Protractor I've been a contributor to Protractor, but it has been deprecated. There are other alternatives now. I think there is also NG WebDriver that I worked with Paul Hammond, who's a committer to Selenium in early days, and bringing up the Java aspect of writing, tests for your Angular applications. So yeah, I think the frameworks will evolve, but the key really, the goal is to look at what works for you and what is the end goal that you're wanting to achieve, whether it's user experience, whether it's coverage, whether it's a quick reproducible tests. It boils to various different factors. I would say, have a conversation with your team and then choose what's best for you, not with what's trending in the market, right?
Yep. Thank you, Minaj. Kelly, we've just had a great question from Mark B that I'm gonna shoot at you. Advice for manual testers with a non-dev background wanting to upskill in automation.
Yeah, I think very, very good kind of question. And it's one that we run into all the time. And I had the same experience. I think moving from a manual through an automated is one where you need to be mindful and be prepared that you need to kind of take on some challenges that are outside of your comfort zone. And I think it's about understanding your team and the support that you can get. Because at the end of the day, it's a lot of you got to get your hands dirty. I think you need to be prepared to jump in and get do an online course, absolutely, and find an appropriate framework or a language, which is a good place to start. But I think you should be open with your team and talk about your initiatives and personal development, professional development, to be able to have that insight be communicated and allow your team members to support you on that journey. So yes, you can do online courses, but also if you choose something that your team can help you with, I think you're going to make that transition a bit more easier.
Thank you, Kelly. Jonathan, we've got a very targeted question. Java with Appium or JavaScript with Appium?
I mean, my cheeky answer would be neither. I think both are very odd languages for doing something like UI automation. I mean, Java's, insanely complicated, or it can be. And people, try and do all of these very strange things with Java when all they want to do is, write a couple UI automation commands. The most complex thing you end up needing to do with your UI test framework is some flexible like composition inheritance stuff. And so for that, a language like Python is going to be my recommendation, because it lets you do the sort of object-oriented thing very directly without getting in your way. Java, I think, gets in your way a lot. It says, no, you can't do this dynamic thing that you want to do, or whatever. And JavaScript, I write most of the code that I write in JavaScript, so obviously I'm fond of it. But even with things like async await to help your code be clean, it's kind of like Why are you using an asynchronous language to do things synchronously? It's just not kind of the most natural. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use those languages. You know, if you know Java really well, then use Java. And if you're a web developer and you know JavaScript, or if your whole team writes everything in JavaScript, front end and back, then use JavaScript because that makes sense. But if you're just starting out, and I created this course recently to teach Appium and Selenium and to teach programming as part of it for people that want to learn more about automated testing who may not have a technical background. I teach it in Python because I think it's just the best to get started, and there's not like an upper limit that Python like prevents you from doing all the complex things you might eventually want to do. So, my opinion there.
Thank you, Jonathan. And yes, I highly recommend Headspin University as well. Having personally used a couple of the courses, like if you want to learn a bit of Appium, etc., definitely check it out. Bazarat, as a developer, actually let me say something before this. So let's see where we're at. We've had a look at the frameworks. We've chosen our frameworks. We've started to implement it depending on our scenarios. We've got it up and running in CI. How do we show the benefits? Because that is absolutely key. Because we need to constantly, as a community, as testers, be constantly showing the actual achievements we're making, the value we're delivering, so we can continue to grow in the industry and continue to get great work. So Bazarat, as a developer, how do you show the value of automation testing at your company?
So what I've done in the past is really use the tests as the showcase. So at Australia Post, we used to have showcases to show the progress that we made in the past 2 weeks. And what I used to do is actually write the automation test for it and run that automation test in front of the stakeholders. What this helps with a number of things. First, it runs quite fast. B, it shows that the feature is actually running, and and because you're doing it using an automation framework, you're less likely to make errors during the showcase. And then with something like Cypress, it would even show the steps that you've taken, so you can go back and modify the steps if you need to in front of the audience. That's quite impressive. Even before Cypress was a thing, we were actually using Selenium with Selenium screenshots and just going through the screenshots as well, like recording them in front of them. Like the browser runs, you get the screenshots, and then when they have questions, you can talk to the screenshots. Because if you do the showcase live as a user experience, you can't actually go back, and you end up like constantly modifying the screens, and that's slower than just showing them the screenshots. Okay, this is what we did. It's just the screen that you're talking about. Let's talk about the screen a bit more. And then in terms of getting encouragement from the QAs, really doing the automation is there to relieve the stress that the QA might feel when a feature is about to go live, because you don't really record yourself sitting there and testing everything, but you can record yourself that I've written this test and this is what I've tested. Is this okay? And if issues arise, and they will definitely arise, irrespective of how much testing that you do, you have something to fall back on. Okay, so this is what I tested. This is what we missed. Let's improve this. So do it in the showcases, and then talk about reduced stress for developers and QAs.
Thank you, Bazarat. I'm going to throw this next one over to Kelly. API automation tests are hard to show in a demo. They're not pretty like a UI automation test. How do you convey the value from high coverage API automation testing?
Yeah, you nailed it. They're not as pretty, not as visual. No one wants to see lines of code. I think kind of what I touched on earlier in the session today, it's all about, first of all, getting that understanding of what API tests are, I think is probably the first. So you start by laying it out on the table and going, this is what APIs are, and this is how you check them. And the reason for that is, especially coming from a native mobile background, you get a 2-for-1. So if you have your API checks in place, then it means that all your clients that are consuming those endpoints are also checked, because you want to be able to kind of catch those issues. So if you catch the issues at the API level, then it means that your front-end clients, your web, your Android, your iOS app, is in a better place. So I feel like it's all about that common understanding of what your API tests can actually do. Another approach that I've kind of used though in the past is to almost make it a bit more visual, and I would use a tool like Charles. So a proxy, basically a web proxy tool to intercept those API calls with your front end app. So the idea around that is you can rewrite some of those calls as you intercept them and demonstrate an app's behavior on those not so happy paths. So when yes, there are edge case scenarios that will happen in the app, and it's very hard for a stakeholder to actually visualize those. They may see it as a requirement or a design at somewhere along the lines. But I think if you show almost how your app, for example, would behave by using a tool like Charles, it will, I guess, almost put a visual line in between what a back end and front end looks like, and then it might get those stakeholders more on board as to what an API is and what API tests can actually do. So I think little things like that along the way help educates and help for people to understand that APIs are there, and they deserve as much as of a test coverage as every other component in your in your environment.
Thank you, Kelly. You know, having automation is one thing, but getting time to do automation as part of the way you work, as part of sprint, it's always been a complex issue. You know, when reality hits and you've got deadlines incoming, perhaps the testers and developers don't have time to introduce, you know, new automation tests for a particular feature, or to really test it and add outlier scenarios, etc. I'm going to cross to Jonathan Lips. How do you get the project team on board with allocating time during the sprint for the team to deliver higher quality automation?
I mean, I think you can answer it in different ways. I mean, I would say fundamentally it's a kind of company engineering culture issue. I mean, if people buy into quality as part of the product and as part of their reputation and as part of the whole, like, everybody owns quality, then it's not something you have to fight for. And then you can just, you know, use whatever methodology you want. You know, if you like Agile and Scrum and all this kind of stuff, you can just not allocate percentages of time necessarily, but have it be, you know, part of your definition of done, part of the whole cycle, and come up with, you know, ways to work the team around that. If you work in an organization that's less enlightened, shall we say, then you might have to take on the mantle of like being the quality champion yourself for a while, and part of your mission, in addition to showing like, we kept this bug from going to production, or, you know, we proved that our performance, you know, stayed below this this baseline or whatever, and isn't that good for our users? In addition to like showcasing those things, as we've talked about, you need to, you know, educate your peers and, you know, the management or whatever, so that quality can really become part of the culture of an organization. Because ultimately, that it's stuff like that is driven from the top down, and so if you want it to be there across organization, you might have to do some work to kind of manage up, or whatever the phrase is, that kind of stuff.
Awesome, Jonathan. Thomas, how can we highlight the benefits of performance testing and ensure that teams are able to identify and fix performance issues as they are discovered?
I'd say the key thing with performance testing is to not just say response times are good or bad. Like you're saying, you need to diagnose what's going on, because that's really where the performance tester can give his expertise. Meaning, you absolutely need, when you do performance testing, to monitor. You need to monitor your servers, whether you can do one end or the other. I'd say the best thing is to do both. It's to have both a standard monitoring tool to monitor the OS and everything. Also to monitor the application you're on, like to monitor your Oracle, if you have Oracle database, or MySQL or whatever. You need to monitor like the components, like your Java server or whatever. You need to monitor that. And if you can combine that with an APM tool to leverage integrations between your load testing tool and APM tool to be able to really diagnose what's going on, to really give an insight and give developers, basically tell the developers, so the problem is coming from this class. If you can give the line of code, but the performance tester absolutely needs to have that to be able to say something more than, you know, the response times are high. He needs to be able to diagnose that and give feedback. Yeah.
Thank you, Thomas. I am just going through some of the survey results quickly, preparing. Thank you so much, everyone, for getting on the survey. You guys have done awesome. We do have our winners ready to announce at the end of the event, so looking forward to that. Okay, so Manoj, a different angle. In a market where new automation tools and frameworks are coming out, how often does Selenium promote and prove its usefulness as a leading automation framework?
Good. Okay, where do I start? It's a 10-year history that I think about it. Yeah, I guess Selenium is not new to the market. I think it's been there for a decade or more than that. It doesn't need to prove to anyone that it's useful. It's been there in the market for a very long time. But in terms, I think keeping the community up, what we're doing is to have a Selenium conference that happens every year almost. Every year it happens in US, and the alternate year happens in rest of the world. So we have had in multiple places. We are ready to come down to Australia, but we are planning. We don't know quite when yet. But yes, we have done almost in India every year, and US almost all the years. Every alternate year, and in the Europe as well. I guess conference is one of the ways to keep the community up and show, bring in some interesting use cases that people used in their day-to-day daily life and solving complex technical business problems with Selenium. And over the period of time, we have seen people demand that, Selenium is is a test automation framework, right? And what we have done as part of conference is to go beyond that and also include other innovative testing solutions that they have done in day-to-day life as well. We do encourage such proposals and such talking points in the conference. And apart from that, I think having people who just do automation know more about what they do in day-to-day life, just inspecting element and picking up an XPath or a CSS. I think what's more important, I think the Selenium community has taught the people is to understand how web works and understand how what the W3C spec is all about, right? I think in the past, if you ask me, at least 8-9 years ago, there used to be a common sort of an error that everyone used to see who would do automation, right? You pick an ID, you either use by.id or XPath or CSS using an ID. You don't see that unique in a web page, right? But according to W3C spec, it is a bug that every element on your page should have its unique ID. I think starting from there till now, I think people have learned what's how a proper web should look like in terms of BW3 standard. And Selenium is just an implementation of that spec. We have other tools in the space like WebDriver.io who who have their own implementation on top of it. And we're also looking at what other teams or other people are looking forward to going with other tools, like say for example the DevTools API that I was talking about, which I've myself used. Honestly, tools like Playwright and Cypress are good at it, that Selenium lacks. So what we have done is we have learned from that experience, and we have included that sort of capability in Selenium 4, so that people can still use spending all these years writing a framework and a test, and just that for one reason going to other framework doesn't make sense. But providing that capability to help people adapt to that whatever they have in the place is something very important. So I think these are just quite a few examples, and there are many. I guess this sets up a tone on how we care about the community and overall testing and automation community.
Awesome. Thank you, Manoj. I've got a great question from Syed Sabah Hassan. I'm going to point this one towards Buzzerat. Just need to know from the community how far contract and pack testing is being used. In a multi-squad environment, do all squads should follow it or not?
So pack testing is something that became really popular a few years back, around 3 years or 4 years back. And I'm a big fan of it. I can't imagine how developers used to work before it. And a lot of the API documentation tools nowadays will generate some form of packs for you. And in terms of its advantages, so you don't have, every team doesn't have to use it. The one team that should definitely be using it is the one that's writing your APIs, because if they're not on board, then the consumers are if the consumer want a pact, it's definitely going to get out of date with the API documentation. So start with the APIs, and then not every team has to use it immediately, but you really get the maximum benefit the more the teams use it. What we have ended up doing nowadays in a number of the projects that I'm working on, what we do at Canva as well as what I did at Australia Post, is everything is TypeScript, so Node.js on the back end and React in the front end. And we have this common package that is shared between the backend and the front end, and it's all TypeScript type definitions. That was like, so we weren't even using any packed system at Australia Post. At Canva, actually, they've gone through a number of migrations, and we have something like a pact. We are actually using protobufs for it. We're actually not using the minimizing of the data section, like the compression over the wire portion of the protobuf, but we're still using the protobuf definitions to ensure that our Java code and our front-end TypeScript code has the same structure. So what we do in that case is the Java code follows the protobuf, and the client-side code, what we do is we generate the TypeScript type definitions from protobuf and then use that. So yeah, big fan. Definitely start at the server and then propagate from there.
Thank you, Bazarat. Bit of a unique one for the panel. So raise your hand in the panel if you have experience in AI for automation testing. Anyone? Jonathan, this question's for you. What is your experience in AI for automation testing other than visual comparison?
Yeah, I have, I guess, a talk on this. It might be a little outdated now, but it was based on kind of, a year ago or so, like the state of AI tools. For them, I'll make this very short. There's sort of tools that are called AI, and I kind of say that they're AI in marketing only, because nowadays, obviously people don't have a standard definition of AI, and so many tools are marketed as AI when they just mean software driven, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you say AI, and whoever asked the question may have said AI/ML, right? That implies that your artificial intelligence is coming from some kind of data set that you've gathered, and you've trained some kind of classifier or something like that. And so there the question is, okay, well, what problem are you trying to solve, and how does the tool solve this problem? So there are tools like, let's say, I think Applitools could be a good example of having, some kind of model that they've trained on certain visual characteristics of applications so that they're a little bit more intelligent about not giving you false positives. So that's a good example of AI used in kind of a supporting role for automation. Or another example is Headspin, the company I work for. We do this a lot, actually. So we have features that we provide that kind of use the application data as input. So it might be, let's say, a video stream. If you're testing a video streaming app, and you might want to know, like, was the video quality good? You could sit there and you could watch it, but that's hard to automate. And so Headspin trained a model on a bunch of videos of different quality. So now you can automatically get a what's called a mean opinion score of your video quality just by running your Appium test on Headspin. So again, that's kind of artificial intelligence, machine learning used in sort of a supporting role. There are a few companies that are trying to use it in more than a supporting role. So this is something like what Test AI is doing. It's more of a kind of reinforcement learning based approach on getting artificially intelligent bots to kind of crawl through your application and discover issues. So it's something that's more advanced than like a monkey testing or things like that, because it's actually using bots that have been trained on a variety of applications and have found ways to use those applications more or less like a human through some kind of reinforcement learning. That's interesting. I haven't seen enough of that to know like the value of that compared to writing your own automated test suite in terms of the types of things that it finds, but certainly something I would consider throwing on in parallel and seeing if you get value out of it. So yeah, I guess that to summarize, I would say there's a bunch of tools that really are not like machine learning based at all that call themselves AI, and they just mean we use software to implement this tool, which is great. Then there's kind of AI in sort of a supporting role, which I think is very useful, increasingly common. So things like the video quality detector. And then there's things where it's kind of AI in the leading role, where the AI is actually driving your automation and telling you, supposedly telling you if it finds anything wrong. So definitely things to keep your eye out for. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. For our last question today, I'm going to go to Kelly. How important is it to be involved in different types of testing, like being a QA, security testing, functional testing, usability testing, or even performance testing? Is it possible to take care of all of these types of testing by any automation tool available in the market? Thanks for the question, Nidhi. Kelly?
Yeah, I think it's important to be across each of the disciplines. I think obviously they are specialist areas, and so the level of detail that you can go into each of those will be based, I guess, on your experience, your background, and your exposure to those needs. But I think overall, as a tester, I think you should be very much familiar with those requirements, because you're going to run into them at some point in your career, especially some of those key ones around performance and security. They tend to come up. So I think it's about giving that direction. In terms of overarching tools, me personally, I haven't used a single tool that's been able to kind of allow me to facilitate each of those types individually into one. What I have used, I guess, in the past is management, like, test case management tools, for example, that allow me to manage an overarching view of all of the test activity that happens on a project. And that allows me to ensure that all my requirements that relate to non-functional testing is captured. So I can manage that from a test reporting point of view and ensure coverage. But that's probably, from my experience, the type of tool that I would use in that kind of practice to ensure coverage.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay. Before we conclude Testing Talks Online and announce our final winners, I just want to do a final big thank you. So obviously, first and foremost, thank you to our amazing panelists. You guys have been incredible today. Shared some absolute pearls of wisdom from all your great experiences and careers to date. So thank you so much for joining us. Especially thank you to our international speakers. Poor Thomas had to wake up at like 3:30 in the morning just to be here. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate that. Jonathan could be out at a lovely dinner right now, I'm sure. So, but he's here with us, which is amazing. So thank you. And Manoj, obviously coming from India, what's happening there with COVID is obviously devastating. You've still managed to come today and be an absolute integral part of this. So thank you so much. Obviously, just hoping you're a safe man over there, and all the best to the family. To our amazing attendees, really, it's you that make this all possible. You guys keep showing up, coming along to our events, providing great feedback. Over 45 questions were asked at this session today. That's absolutely incredible. I know our panelists have loved actually answering a lot of them. They've answered 30 of them personally as well. So thank you so much for that. Our partners, obviously, who are aligned in the Testing Talks vision, that our community deserve more fun days in the calendar to learn, share, and have fun. So thanks again to Tricentis, Headspin, and Vornex. Many of you might have heard of our partners. Headspin is a platform to take your mobile experience to the next level. But what amazes me as a tester is how the Headspin platform gives its customers access to thousands of real devices and endpoints across 100 locations in more than 70 countries around the world, allowing customers to test their software manually or with automation on those devices. Really cool stuff. Obviously, Tricentis, a lot of people have heard about. They're an incredible company. They empower our testing community by helping us become automation experts through their products, services, and trainings. Its world-leading platform, Tricentis Tosca, helps to accelerate testing with a low-code, no-code approach. Tricentis also recently acquired Neotis, which means they now provide one of the leading performance testing tools in the market called NeoLoad. Both Tricentis and Headspin are passionate about sponsoring local testing initiatives and events like Testing Talks Online that are focused on providing a platform for our community to connect, learn, share, and importantly, have lots of fun. So without further ado, the winners of today's prizes. So the $100 Amazon gift card is going out to Nitesh Jain for some of the great questions you submitted here today. Congratulations. The drone has been won by Jay Thatch. The $100 JB Hi-Fi gift card has been awarded to Tony George. The $100 Woolworths gift card has gone to Kalyan Gupta. The $100 Coles gift card for JR Pondala. The JBL Bluetooth speaker, Matthew Holiday. And the Amazon Alexa, Hakan's Jolin. All you guys got over between 13 and 16 right in the survey, and you were the clear winners of the 6 prizes. So congratulations. That survey isn't easy. There's a few head scratches in there. So congratulations again. You obviously really know your stuff. That's it from all of us. Big thanks again for coming, and please come along to our next Testing Talks online and keep your ears peeled for what's happening with Testing Talks conference. We're super excited to try and run it. If we do run it, it's going to be a conference. It's going to have amazing speakers, but it's going to be a bloody fun day in the calendar. A day where we can have lots of fun, lots of great prizes, lots of activities, and something we can all look forward to as a community, because let's be honest, in person, we're just not able to come together. So let's keep our fingers crossed that all happens. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone, and we'll speak soon. See you, everybody.